Alright, anyone who follows me or my content knows that I am as analytic friendly as they come, and I'm a huge fan of the work Pro Football Focus does. Of course, when I begin a video by giving that qualifier, that likely means that I have a bone to pick, which, yes, I do. Recently, as Steelers linebacker TJ Watt approached and subsequently tied Michael Strahan's official single-season sack record, there's been a lot of pushback from those who analyze the game past the standard box score. They say that Watt's record doesn't count because it's a 17-game season. They nitpick some of Watt's sacks, calling them low quality. They think that Myles Garrett should be Defensive Player of the Year ahead of Watt because he has a higher pass rush win rate, or that Aaron Donald should be because he's double-teamed more often. There are definitely some valid points made throughout all of this, such as sacks never telling the full story, but they're overshadowed by others that simply ignore pertinent information that would go against the narrative being pushed. Micah Parsons, Donald, Garrett, or Watt are all worthwhile DPOY candidates. You can't be too upset whichever way. Watt is the betting favorite, but if you only followed analytics Twitter or those with PFF in their Twitter handles, you might assume he's not even in the race. They're pushing back too far, so I'm here to push back against that pushback by arguing in favor of TJ Watt, by using more than just sack totals and shooting down some lackluster arguments in the process. First, let's quickly address why the argument that Watt's sack record doesn't count because of the extended season doesn't hold up. The man missed 2 full games, and he played less than 60% of the defensive snaps in 4 other games. So he basically played in about 13 games, and that's not even taking into account that he was fighting through groin and rib injuries in addition to COVID. Sure, without the extra week to make up for missed time, he wouldn't have tied Strahan, so if you don't want to count that in your personal record book, that's fine. But that doesn't mean his season was any less impressive. And whether you count the record or not has no bearing on who was the most impactful defender this season. Additionally, I'd like to hear your thoughts on Eric Dickerson's single-season rushing record. Or is it O.J. Simpson's? Do only records accomplished in 14-game seasons count? Or is it 12? Next, let's discuss sack quality. If you're on football Twitter at all, you've undoubtedly heard someone diminish the quality of some of Watt's sacks this year, specifically the one versus the Browns on a Baker Mayfield scramble, which, yeah, it's not the best looking sack you'll ever see, but it is a sack. Mayfield started his slide behind the line of scrimmage, and Watt was seemingly the first to tag him down. NFL Game Pass isn't supplying all 22 at the moment, so this is the best angle you get. Regardless, he was there, and somebody had to be given a sack. If you want to rule it a half sack, that's fine, but PFF gives all players full credit for what the NFL deems half sacks, so I don't really know why they're concerned about the play anyways. Besides that, anyone who puts up such a high sack total in a season is bound to have a couple that aren't quite up to par. I don't think I really need to remind anybody how Strahan broke the record. You know, when Brett Favre laid down for his friend to tag him, which some might call an aborted play. Which brings me to Week 18 this year, when we all thought TJ Watt initially tied the sack record in the first quarter, before ultimately having to actually do so later in the game. It sure looks like a sack, right? Tyler Huntley received a bad snap, jumped on the ball, and got back up to make a play, but he was greeted by Watt, who immediately took him down and stripped him of the ball once more. Dave Schofield of Behind the Steel Curtain broke this ruling down excellently, which I'll summarize here. It was ruled an aborted play because, per the NFL's Guide for Statisticians, an aborted play is a play from scrimmage during which there is neither a pass nor a kick, where the ball is clearly centered improperly, meaning that the ball does not reach the intended receiver of the snap within the frame of his body or arm span. The guide goes on to say that if the player who recovers the fumble makes an apparent attempt to pass and is tackled behind the line of scrimmage, then it's a sack. But if there is doubt as to whether or not the player recovering the fumble is able to collect himself and make a legitimate attempt to pass, then the play is aborted. Pretty clear-cut and aborted play, right? However, the next line rules that if a defender forces a fumble, then the play is not aborted. And yes, as stated before, Watt was credited with a forced fumble on the play. Thus, by definition, it should have been a sack. And as Schofield points out in his article, the argument that Huntley may have decided to run instead of pass does not hold up either. How many times have you seen a defender bust through the line at the snap and tackle the QB before he can even attempt to do anything? And it's ruled a sack 99 times out of 100. The quarterback not having time to throw on a pass play does not mean that he wasn't going to pass. And suppose he did have time to scramble, but didn't get very far. If a QB decides to forego a pass and scramble but is tackled behind the line of scrimmage, it is still ruled a sack. Watt should not be punished for being so excellent in getting to the QB in such a short period of time. Regardless, I've rambled far too long about this topic, but this just goes to show that you can just as easily add sacks to Watt's total as you can take them away. But speaking of sacks, you will hear a lot that they are overrated, and pressures tell the more complete story of who's getting to the quarterback, which in a lot of cases is true. Sacks are a volatile statistic, and pressures are more reliable. See Vic Beasley in 2016. I see a lot of people dismissing sacks because of this volatile nature, and sure, it could be a source of concern moving forward if a player's sack rate is far superior to his win rate. However, for awards such as Defensive Player of the Year and All-Pro, where we're solely factoring in a single contained season, what happened on the field has to actually matter. Pressures might predict success in the future, but sacks are high-impact plays that actually did happen. That has to be accounted for. And besides, Watt has the 5th best pass rush win rate according to PFF anyways, so it's not as if he's a slouch there. His pure pressure totals aren't there because of all the missed time. He's 14th in pressures, but all the way down at 65th in pass rush snaps. And going by Pro Football Reference's numbers, Watt actually is tied with Garrett for the NFL lead in pressures. But what we should be really looking at is PFF's pass rush productivity rate, which combines sacks, hits, and hurries relative to how many times a player rushes the passer. There, Watt's 10.7 mark sits just barely behind Trey Hendrickson's 10.8 for the league lead. He's over a full point better than Myles Garrett, who ranks 6th, and Aaron Donald, who ranks 17th. Micah Parsons does not have enough snaps to qualify. Similarly, Football Outsiders has a stat called defeats, which adds together TFLs, turnovers caused, and plays that prevent 3rd and 4th down conversions. Again, despite the missed time, Watt tied for the league lead in that metric with his teammate Cameron Hayward with 36 apiece. He had 2 more than Donald despite playing nearly 300 fewer snaps. And no, Donald does not deserve DPOY just because he's double-teamed a lot, which you will often hear. Defensive tackles, by nature of the position and where they line up, are double-teamed more often than edge defenders, as you can see by everyone on the right side of this chart. That's not to say Donald dominating isn't still super impressive, and he's probably still the best overall player in the NFL, but that doesn't mean he's had the most worthy DPOY season as a whole. But now let's knock out another talking point really quickly. PFF's Sam Monson tried to argue that the difference between Myles Garrett's and TJ Watt's sack numbers was solely that Garrett had to play against Ben Roethlisberger in his quick release twice, which is just a really silly argument. I didn't even have to point out why this argument was flawed, because a guy named Finn on Twitter beat me to it and had Sam spinning in circles. He pointed out that Ben was the 7th most sacked quarterback in the league this year, to which Sam responded by saying that Ben gets sacked a lot because he's a bad quarterback and makes dumb plays. So basically the argument is that Ben is so bad that he gets sacked a ton, just not against Garrett and the Browns? Following that logic, if anything, that's a knock on Garrett, not a positive. This may explain away the win rates, but not the sack totals. Watt finished that game with 4 times as many sacks as Garrett did tackles, by the way. If the race between those two is close at all leading up to that Watt performance should have slammed the door shut. No defender made more game-changing plays in 2021 than TJ Watt. Like it or not, but narratives and clutch performances do play a role in awards. And Watt arguably won 4 games by himself for the Steelers. The Seahawks had 2 overtime drives thwarted by Watt in October. On their first drive, they had a 3rd and 4 at Pittsburgh's 45-yard line, but Watt easily blew by Brandon Shell for a 13-yard sack. Seattle got the ball back 4 minutes later, but Watt stripped Geno Smith of the ball on their first play, which Pittsburgh recovered, setting up a chip shot field goal for the win. Against the Bears, Watt harassed Justin Fields all night, compiling 3 sacks. And as Chicago attempted to drive for the game-winning field goal while down 2, Watt saved the Steelers about 8 yards as he batted down Fields' final pass before the Bears had to settle for a 65-yard field goal, which they obviously missed. By the way, Watt was 3rd in the league in batted balls among non-DBs, with 2 more than Donald, 3 more than Garrett, and 5 more than Parsons. In the first matchup with the Ravens, Watt notched 3.5 sacks, including another that could have easily been a game ender as he stripped Lamar Jackson of the ball in their final drive, but it just had the unfortunate roll out of bounds. Nevertheless, he still put heavy heat on Jackson as he attempted what would have been a game-winning 2-point conversion, forcing him to throw off the mark. Finally, in Ben Roethlisberger's final home game, Watt had a closer bond with the opposing quarterback as he brought down Baker Mayfield 4 times and knocked down 2 passes. Watt was a major reason why Roethlisberger miraculously wasn't the worst QB on the field that night. So when PFF argues Watt was only worth less than a third of the win to the Steelers this season, I just simply cannot buy that. They used Aaron Donald's wins above replacement number to justify why he should be the unanimous DPOY. But WAR is a stat in football that still has a ton of kinks to work out for it to be reliable, especially for defensive players where there are so many unknown moving pieces. And PFF's WAR is heavily weighted towards their own grades, which we all know are highly subjective. And I would say this even if Watt didn't have a worse WAR than Darius Leonard. If you really want to know TJ Watt's value this season, just listen to this stat. In games in which he played 40 or more snaps, the Steelers were 9-2. In games he missed or played fewer than 40 snaps, the team went 0-5-1. But he's only worth 0.32 wins apparently. The Steelers would have had a losing record and would have missed the playoffs with a replacement level player in place of Watt this season. I can guarantee you that much. This whole video shouldn't even be necessary, and really it probably won't be once the official awards come out. Watt is basically guaranteed a first-team All-Pro spot, and he's currently minus 400 to win DPOY. However, when a lot of ordinarily smart people are pushing easily debunked narratives and contextless stats, I feel like I have to say something so people don't get misled. TJ Watt had a truly historic season this year, and that's before even accounting for all the time he missed. As evidenced by his elite play in years prior and his excellence in other areas of his game, it's clear he's not just a one-trick pony pass rusher who's had phenomenal luck this year. He's a complete player who's near the top of the leaderboards of every meaningful metric. And when pressure rates and whatnot are pretty similar among the top guys, why shouldn't a huge sack number be a tiebreaker? Hurries may be more stable moving forward, but sacks are more impactful now, which is what the awards are supposed to be measuring. Watt is a game wrecker and a turnover machine. He's one defensive player who I'm confident saying had multiple game-winning plays this season. He has the traditional stats, he has the advanced stats, he has the narratives, and he has the clutch big-time performances. TJ Watt is the favorite for Defensive Player of the Year for a reason, and he should be the runaway winner.